All right, folks, I want to shift gears into a rather serious topic. Yesterday, I believe, was a severe and significant turning point in the war between Russia and Ukraine. And I'm really, really worried, folks, that we're going to all be drawn into this for no good reason. And this war is not about freedom. It's not about democracy. It's about the degradation of the Russian state and then the powers that be that want to go in and implement their stupid policies and their stupid systems. Okay, so this is not about democracy and it's not about freedom. That is all a lie. You know, to begin with, I was an instrument of the deep state, believing that the evil Russians should never invaded Ukraine and they were innocent in everything they were doing. But the longer this goes on, the more I can see it for what it actually is. So I just want to remind everybody, not yesterday, the day before. So on Thursday here in Sydney, Sergei Shoigu, the boss of the Russian military, came out and said that if the Ukrainians use Storm Shadow, attack arms, or ground-launched small-diameter bombs, so any long-range weapon systems supplied by the West, to attack Crimea, that he would consider that the US and the UK are directly involved in the war, meaning they're not just supporting them, they are directly involved and they're directing it. And the reality is he's 100% right, because there's no way that we could strike Crimea with long-range weapon systems because the Ukrainians didn't have them. They've only got them because we gave it to them. So we are directly involved in this war. But I think it's just a matter of time before the Russians actually get this to spill over and it extends into something else. And I believe that this red line is the final red line. And the Russians keep drawing red lines. Don't cross it. Don't cross it. I'm telling you, don't cross it. But this, I believe, is the last one, because they've said repeatedly on many occasions that if you go and try and attack Crimea and try and take that ground back, that's considered an existential threat to the existence of our nation, and we will use nuclear weapons on you. So there's a couple of things that happened. The day after he said that, the Ukrainians struck a bridge that connects Crimea to Ukraine, and this is what the bridge did look like. So bear with us here, folks. I think we might be having a technical problem, so hopefully you can see the image on the screen. So there's two bridges. One that is closest to the bottom of the screen is the one that was struck, and the other one there was not. It was hit by a storm shadow, put a big hole in the bridge, looks like that. But literally 24 hours later, the Russians have built a pontoon bridge right next to it. So it kind of makes the whole thing a moot point, and it really doesn't matter because the water that it's crossing there, the river, is not very wide. Looks like it's only 100 or 200 meters wide there. So they've built a pontoon bridge, but we can hit that again, and that's not really going to be a problem. But I doubt that they'll use another cruise missile to take down a pontoon bridge, which is going to be fixed in the next 3 hours. So, you know, them hitting that bridge, is that making a difference to the way this is actually going to play out? Yeah, maybe, because it definitely slows down the supply chain and the logistics. And the reason that this matters so much in the southern part of Ukraine as it comes out of Crimea is that's because how the Russian forces in the south are being resupplied. Something in the vicinity of 70% of the resupplies are coming across that part of the world in the southern part of Crimea. And as they've taken down all of these bridges, what it does is it makes it, the Russians have to go the long way round to actually get there, and, you know, extending their supply chains causes all sorts of problems, right? So this is the Ukrainians shaping the battlefield. So when I look at all of this, I kind of just, I look at it and wonder, are the Russians now going to make good on their threat? And their direct threat was, we now consider the US and the UK to be part of this conflict. So now they're considering that. So the video that I created on Thursday was all about, if the Russians do say that, then Australia is now at war with Russia. And are we already at war with Russia anyway because we're supplying the Ukrainians all this stuff? Well, it's a proxy war, so yes. But if the Russians declare war, then that means by association, Australia will be drawn in, so will Canada, so will New Zealand, so will all the Five Eyes will be pulled into that. And then any other countries that are supporting will also be pulled in. The Japanese will be pulled in, the South Koreans will be pulled in. Everyone will be pulled in, and all of NATO as well. So this is a major, major escalation. And we haven't seen this happen. We've only heard the threats and the rhetoric from the Russians. I want to play a quick video about what Zelensky says. So just bear with it, because he's talking Ukrainian, and then there's a translator over the top of it. So I'll just turn the sound down a bit because it's quite loud. But have a listen to what he says, because there's some element of truth to what Zelensky is saying here.
Will have to send their sons and daughters exactly the same way as we are sending their sons and daughters to war. And they will have to fight, because it's NATO that we're talking about, and they will be dying, God forbid, because it's a horrible thing.
So he's saying, give me all the weapons and we'll fight for you on your behalf so you don't have to fight there. So we know from NATO and Article 5, and everybody's an expert on the war now, that if Russia strikes anybody in NATO, that will trigger Article 5, because a strike on one is a strike on everybody. And the only time that was really triggered was during 9/11. So America were attacked. That means NATO comes to its rescue. That's why Denmark was in Afghanistan. Like, what? Why was Australia in Afghanistan? Because of the ANZUS treaty that we have, where we follow America blindly into every conflict and get involved in everything that's going on there like that. Look, put all that aside for a second. This is how it happens. So what does it mean if Shoigu says this is a red line? So his red line is, now that US and the UK are directly involved in the conflict, now what Russia is going to do is go after command and control that we haven't gone after before. So you would think that the Russians had been trying to target Zelensky and his government. And I watched an interview yesterday for about 40 minutes, so you don't have to watch it because it's pretty painful. It's like pulling your fingernails out yourself, with the Russian ambassador in the UK. And the reporter is really quite belligerent towards this guy. He doesn't really give him a chance. And the Russian ambassador is like, listen, man, this is an interview. You're interviewing me. This is not a conversation. Ask me the questions, I'll give you the answers. And he just doesn't give him a chance to speak properly. And one of the questions that he asks is, are you going to, what do you want? Like, what's the end state? And pretty much what the Russian guy says is, we just want to get rid of the government. Yeah, and we want Ukraine to be neutral, not to be in NATO, and we want to use that as a buffer zone. So it's everything that you and I have been saying, Ed, the whole time. And you might not like this guy, you might not like his attitude, you might not like the way that he's speaking or what he's saying. But the reality is, it doesn't matter if you like him or not. The only way to end a war is to sit down and talk with people you don't like. The whole reason you're at war is because you don't like them, you don't like what they're saying. But you have to listen to what they say. But essentially, the Ukrainians on their side are saying Russia has to leave all territory and go back to 2014 borders, which means includes Crimea. And the Russians are saying the Ukrainian government's got to go because they're a bunch of Nazis. And they're a bunch of liars that are actually causing all sorts of problems. And they've started the war in 2014 when they were bombing the Donbass, killing thousands of people, which is also true. So it's a very, very complicated situation. But Shoigu has said that if you strike Crimea, we're going to go after your command and control, and we're going to go after your centers of gravity, to use his word, which means we're going to go after your leadership. So now they're going after the leadership. All right, good luck with that, because we've got all the missile defense systems in place in Kyiv, and Patriot will shoot them down, NASAM will shoot them down. All of this, your Kinzhal missiles haven't really worked at scale the way that you thought, because they've been engaged by Patriot, because hypersonic missiles are not as good as stealth missiles. Apparently that's how this is playing out. But Putin came out just a couple of days ago in St. Petersburg, and I'm joining all the dots here for you folks, and I'll show you why this matters in a sec. He came out and said, we've got weapon systems that can attack any target, anywhere, at any time, irrespective of your defenses. And I think what he's talking about is a hypersonic ballistic missile that's going to rain down from space. So if they do fire a ballistic missile that literally comes down from space, and I'm not like talking an Iskander missile that skims the top of the atmosphere. I'm talking about one that comes out of the atmosphere and comes down at 25 times the speed of sound and lands on the parliament building of Kyiv with a conventional warhead. It will take out that place, and it can't be shot down because it simply cannot be intercepted with the systems that we've actually got. So when you join the dots between what Shoigu was saying, what Putin is saying, and what they're threatening to do, now we cross their red line. Does that mean that this is going to escalate? Well, if it escalates to a nuclear level, this is what the Americans have now come out and said. And this is really important, folks. I want you to listen closely to this, because a strike on NATO means NATO is going to be drawn into the conflict. But the Russians are not striking NATO. They're not. They're threatening to go after centers of gravity using conventional weapons. But the American government is trying to shape the battlefield of your mind to get you ready for a nuclear attack of some description. Now, that could be we blow up the cooling pool in Zaporizhia, all the water leaks out of it, and there's a massive nuclear fallout that happens there as a result of it. So we talk about false flags all the time. Would the Ukrainians do that to themselves? Would they blow up their own dam? Would they blow up the Nord Stream pipeline? Would they blow the barrier of that cooling pool to let all the water out, to let a massive nuclear apocalypse run riot throughout Europe? Well, what defines the threshold of NATO getting involved there? Let's take a listen to what the number one warmonger / warhawk, Lindsey Graham, has got to say.
Today, since the Senate resolution that says that if Russia or Belarus, or a proxy of Russia, explodes a nuclear device inside of Ukraine to stop the counteroffensive.
So very clearly he says explodes a nuclear device. So he doesn't say anything about Zaporizhia or a nuclear accident or something happening in the crossfire. So he's talking about an actual nuke.
Try to break the will of the Ukrainian people. Such an attack should be considered an attack on NATO itself.
All right, folks, that's the escalation right there. He's saying that if nuclear weapons are used in Ukraine, so you're not attacking NATO or America or any of the allies directly, then NATO will get involved, and he's passed that legislation.
We're of the belief that a nuclear weapon unleashed in Ukraine would irradiate large portions of Europe where we have NATO allies.
So right there, I think that's the actual ambiguity. That's the strategic ambiguity of what he's saying. And I've watched this a couple of times and listened very carefully to what he's saying. So he's saying if you use a nuclear weapon on Ukraine, and then he's talking about the fallout cloud. So he's saying the result. So now just fast forward 2 weeks into the future when they blow the side of the dam, whether that's the Russians, the Ukrainians, or somebody else blows up the side of, not the dam, the cooling pond, all the water leaks out, the fuel rods are exposed, and suddenly radiation is leaking out all over Europe. Is that the same as a nuclear detonation? Yeah, it's exactly, in some ways, it's probably worse, because any nuclear detonation that's going to happen is going to be an airburst. Yeah, it's not a Terminator movie where these bombs hit the ground and pull up massive fallout. They'll set the bomb off at 15,000 feet in the atmosphere, and the overpressure from the bomb destroys everything on the ground. That we don't need a ground strike, and there is no radiation fallout from something like that. There's the gamma radiation that hits the people on the ground when the bomb goes off, but in terms of fallout and dust, nuclear winters and all of those things, almost nothing happens when that goes on. So if they put an airburst at 15 or 20,000 feet in the atmosphere, it will destroy a massive part of Ukraine and a massive part of the battlefield, but it won't actually create massive nuclear fallout. So the Russians can use nuclear weapons pretty effectively as a battlefield tool. That's when they call them tactical, even though there's no such thing as a tactical or strategic, they're just nuclear weapons. But they can use it tactically to destroy parts of the battlefield without creating huge amounts of fallout, because they don't want to be on the receiving end of that either. So that's how they do it. But if they take out this cooling pool, and it's very, very likely that this is going to happen, the result will be the same as a ground burst. And if anything, it will be much worse.
And why are we doing this? President Biden says threat of Putin using tactical nuclear weapons is real. That's like the 20th story down. So with a sense of urgency, we're urging our colleagues here to get serious about what could happen in Ukraine. Moving the tactical nuclear weapons out of Russia to Belarus was unnerving and I think very provocative. The counteroffensive is moving slowly but steadily.
It's hard to watch, hey? It's hard to watch because you feel that feeling of despair where you're like, don't, man, you're escalate. Stop it, man. Why don't you just get on the phone? Just get on the phone and talk to Putin. And if he doesn't pick up your call him again tomorrow, and then the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and figure out what you can do to stop this. But instead of figuring out what to do to stop this, what they're trying to do is use strategic deterrence, and they're trying to use deterrence to say that don't even think about it. Don't think about it for a second. But the reality is they are already thinking about it because they moved the nukes into Belarus. So what's the next thing we're going to do? We're going to move nukes out of Turkey and out of Italy and move those nukes into Ukraine to say, here's the ultimate deterrent right here. We've got now Ukraine have got nukes as well. It's like, come on, man. All right, let's finish up what he's got to say here.
Looking for a break, they will commit the forces that have been trained by the West, 6 or 8 regiments, thousands of well-trained, well-equipped forces will be put into the battle when they can exploit an opportunity. So the Ukrainians are patient. Russia has fortified their defensive positions. They've mined the whole country. They've been committing war crimes on steroids, very abusive.
Listen to his rhetoric. They've mined the whole country. You don't know that, man. They've committed war crimes on steroids. Again, yes, we've
Both
seen
sides.
some, but yeah, both sides. But you don't know that. Like, so, I created a little graphic here, and it says, where is it? It says, is this all just shaping the public battlefield? And I would say yes. Shaping the battlefield means getting ready for an assault. So are they getting you ready for an assault? Well, they're doing more than that, because they're passing laws that allow NATO to engage directly with the Russians in the event that this actually unfolds.
War being waged by Putin. But we're here to talk about something nobody else seems to want to talk about. I applaud President Biden for putting on the table that the threat of Putin using a nuclear weapon in Ukraine is real.
Well,
And our message is
so
to
the
those
fuck
around.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's enough of the world's worst warmonger, I think.
I hope you couldn't hear me swearing under my breath.
Yeah, I
as he was
could.
talking. Oh, could you? Oh, darn it.
I didn't mute you. I left it in there because I like seeing the American reaction. It's crazy,
Wow.
isn't it? It's crazy.
I have no use for Lindsey Graham. He is why I'm not a Republican. Listen, I'm definitely not a Democrat, but I mean, I'm closer to the Republicans in theory, but there are a lot of Republicans I have no use for. And
Why don't you like him?
He's because of stuff like this. This guy, you can't depend. He's not a consistent conservative. He picks and chooses when he wants to be a conservative. And in this case, listen, we had a peace deal a year ago. Okay,
we did. Probably people like him that scuttled it.
That's right. That's right. And why? Because okay, I'm not a fan of Putin, so don't misunderstand me. Everyone, don't start sending me hate mail. But listen, in many ways, Putin is being far more reasonable than the other side. If Putin's objective in Ukraine is to have a government in Ukraine that is not adversarial to Russia, kind of like the government that we had before Zelensky. If they're just a friendly government, so we can rely on them not, joining NATO and not doing things.
And who overthrew that government?
Yeah, CIA.
CIA.
Yeah. Listen,
just saying, man.
So Putin's definition of success that's his definition, whereas Zelensky's definition of success is we want Donbass back, we want Crimea back, and we want Putin gone. Okay, Come on. Between the two, who do you think would be more reasonable between in the definition of success? What is victory?